Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Bombe Wash Process Ethiopia from Maquina Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Maquina, based out of Coatesville, Pennsylvania. And this coffee was a suggestion to us by our good buddy Zach. So shout out to and thank you to Zach for the suggestion. And since they are a Pennsylvania-based coffee roaster and they were a suggestion to us by Zach, we opted to use the blind tiger mug that was gifted to us by our good buddy a little while back here. But Maquina, yeah, they're a coffee roaster that has appeared on this channel one time before, as we reviewed their Rambagira last year, which was a really nice coffee. It actually ended up in our honorable mentions category for our top 10 coffees of 2021 list. So going into this, I have a pretty high impression of Maquina as a whole, so we'll see if this coffee lived up to those expectations, as this right here is day 21 of this coffee. The recipe we went with for this coffee was a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 201 degree Fahrenheit, and I didn't have a huge preference between the V60 or the Chemex, so depending on if you like a little bit more body, then the V60 is the way to go, but that would indicate a more medium fine grind with the V60, of course, medium grind with the Chemex, and the roast profile for Maquina is an American light medium. And with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. So day 4, first time trying it, and I knew it was probably early, and typically when I try a lot of these coffees early, they come out a little hollow. But this one didn't come out hollow, it actually came out quite a bit smoky. So it left a little bit of an okay first impression. There was quite a bit of honey in this cup of coffee as well. I just knew it was too early to be drinking this coffee, but I think the biggest takeaway I had from that first time trying it was maybe the temperatures were too high, as I typically start things when I don't have a brew guide from the roaster themselves at 205 degrees, and I felt, yeah, that's probably a little high for this coffee. So we went back on day 6, lowered the temperatures, ran it through the Chemex, and was experiencing significantly better results, as the most distinct thing is a honeysuckle floral component, which is going to be the theme throughout the time drinking this coffee, most dominant characteristic in it. But in addition to that, there's a slight bit of peachiness in the finish, and the cup of coffee has some slight citric acidity at the warmer temperatures, which is something we'll discuss in the tasting wheel. But overall, significantly better second impression. Day 8, dropped the temperatures again and was still experiencing a fair bit of that lingering honey. Such a lasting finish to this cup of coffee and a pretty pronounced characteristic to it. Strong bit of sweetness and a big increase in the overall peachiness. So it was the best day of the cup of coffee to that point, and anytime there's a peach flavor note, my primary objective is to get as much of the peachiness out of the cup of coffee as I can. Day 10, same consistency across brew methods, as it was another nice day, this time through the Chemex. Kept the recipe the same, lowered the temperature, seeing plenty of honey yet again. Peachiness as the secondary characteristic, and just an overall nice, well-rounded cup of coffee in that sense. Day 12, coffee seems to be at its best after it's cooled down a bit. That's not too uncommon. Most coffees I actually like best when drinking them, maybe slightly above room temperature. But other than that, seeing some darker floral honey components in this cup of coffee, and as it cools down, slightly more peach candy. But even then, the finish is still a pretty lasting honey to it. Day 14, coffee has dropped a little bit in its overall vibrancy, seeing a slight bit more smokiness on this day. Honey is still the overly dominant characteristic and has a very long-lasting finish for that honey component in this cup of coffee. And then day 16, seeing a lot more of the drop-off, but I didn't necessarily see that as a bad thing, as the honey characteristic from time to time was maybe a little bit too dominant for the rest of the cup of coffee, as my hope was to get significantly more of the peachiness. But more balanced cup of coffee overall as a result. Honeysuckle still in significant abundance, just less fruity overall. I think the thing that I've lost the most from the time I started this coffee was the fruit flavors that were coming from it. So that's not necessarily the best, but even then, I'm still a huge fan of florals, so having a lot of florals was pretty nice. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. And quite a few level 4s, so let's run through them real quick. Cleanliness, level 4, that one I know is 100% justified. It's a pretty clean cup of coffee. I mentioned that there's a little bit of smokiness from time to time, and yeah, that detracts from it ever so slightly, but pretty clean nonetheless. Finish, level 4. The honey finish in this cup of coffee is definitely quite pronounced, so I think that that's justified at level 4. And I know the sweetness, maybe it's a slight bit generous at level 4. It's on the slightly lower side of level 4, but it's definitely not a level 3. So I think it's still a sweeter cup of coffee in general, especially during those middle days, day 8 through day 12 or so. Florals, level 4, that one's definitely justified. I don't even say the higher side of level 4, it's perfectly right there in that level 4 mark, as it was the most dominant characteristic the entire time drinking this cup of coffee, honeysuckle, and that's such a common flavor for cups of coffee in general, that very pronounced. And then the stone fruit at level 4, I know I'm being a little generous with that, as the peachiness was never in huge abundance for me. Lower side of that level 4, but It could have even been the level 3 if I'm being completely honest, but it just would have been on the higher side of that level 3. The acidity at the level 3 was the one thing that I don't think I was necessarily expecting from this cup of coffee, as it just felt a little bit more citric acidic than I think I was expecting going into it, and I'm still getting quite a fair bit of that here on day 21. Body level 3, so I know that this was made with the V60, as the body would have been a level 2 with the Chemex. That's usually the biggest differentiating factor between those two brew methods. Slight bit of bitterness, slight bit of smokiness as the extras in this cup of coffee, but for the most part, I really like the way that this tasting wheel looks. I think it's pretty accurate of what I was getting from this cup of coffee. Alright, my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I feel like, being this is the third time we've discussed a Maquina coffee on this channel, I'm starting to see a pretty similar theme that I had with Little Wolf's coffee as well. This isn't unique in the sense that I've had so many cups of coffee that taste this exact same way. What really set the Rambagira apart was, even though it wasn't overly unique, it was exceptionally well done. And I think that this is another well done cup of coffee, but I've had so many of these cups of coffee, and that goes along the lines of me not liking reviewing Ethiopians to begin with, because I'll be honest, I don't know what would necessarily differentiate this cup of coffee from any other Ethiopia I've had in my life. The honey being a little bit too pronounced was a little bit of a detracting factor from this cup of coffee, as well as I was really hoping for a lot more of the peachiness in this cup in general. So for all of those factors combined, I think it's yet again another well done cup of coffee from Maquina, but nothing that will necessarily be overly memorable for me specifically, and I think that just kind of leads into the type of person I would suggest this coffee to, and type of person I would suggest Maquina's coffees to in general. I think if you really like that box, I think that Maquina does an exceptional job of coffees that are within that realm, within that box. So I discussed the Kenya that we had, and it wasn't a surprise that people that typically love those traditional American Kenyans, those kind of very tomato-like Kenyans, they loved that one. People that love the kind of more clean, black tea savory sort of Rwandans, that's why I really liked that one. And I think people that love the really floral Ethiopians that are maybe just, within that box, then this is another good cup of coffee for you. But that's a little bit of a sticking point for me, honestly, at this point, is I really want an Ethiopia that just sets itself apart for being truly spectacular or truly unique, and just not necessarily this cup of coffee for me. I think for the most part, I'll leave this review at that. If you've by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee or anything from Maquina, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of them, or it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Bombe Wash Processed Ethiopia from Maquina Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.